Welcome to Blazing a Path to the Public Cloud, presented by Trility today. I'm going to be your MC. My name is Brody Darren. I'm Chief Strategy Officer here at Trility. Trility, who are we? We're a business and technology consulting company. We're based in Des Moines, Iowa, and we help companies of from all sorts of different industries, geographies, sizes, who are looking to defend or extend their market share through strategies that are either led or supported by technology solutions. And we prefer to do that in a project-based capacity. So we like to provide specific deliverables, have a clear stop and start, and desired outcome agreed upon with our customers and deliver upon that desired outcome. We have 6 primary focus areas, as you'll see represented here on this slide. Cloud and DevOps, of course, will be the primary focus of what we're talking about today. But just the tip of the spear of the variety of things that Trility does. And without further ado, it's my pleasure now to present our speakers for today. First to present will be Eric Gerling. Eric's a senior cloud engineer and architect for Trility, and he's been working in software design and implementation for over 20 years. He spent the last 10 years working in public cloud systems with a heavy focus on DevOps practices and deploying infrastructure as code. He favors working on middle and lower tier technologies where security, performance, scalability, and reliability are the most important and visible attributes that no one asks for, but everybody expects. And following Eric will be Cory Carlton. Cory is a senior cloud engineer and architect for Trility as well. Cory has over 20 years of experience in a wide array of information technologies, making the transition from the on-premise data center world into the public cloud 10 years ago. Since then, Cory's been focused on production class cloud hosted venues, utilizing infrastructure as code approaches for elastic ephemeral cloud pipeline implementations. And he's helped a number of organizations successfully transition from brick and mortar to the public cloud. And just in case you're thinking that 10 years in the cloud leads to hair loss, if you're not a sarcastic grouch, then you haven't been working in DevOps long enough. So thank you for Statler and Waldorf joining us today. And without further ado, I'll kick it over to Statler, otherwise known as Eric Gerling.
Hello, everyone. So we'll start off, and I think this was in some of the marketing material, but was having a conversation with some folks here at Trility, and we were trying to find good ways to explain to people that are maybe not in technology or still learning, good ways to sort of explain, right? Good analogies or metaphors. And parenting was probably the best one I could come up with, right? So every time you go to launch a new cloud, right, you have just months of effort, months of work, and then you have that one moment where it finally launches and you're like, we're out there. And that's really just when it began, right? And so, you know, you're exhausted from the journey. And then once you get the first one up, then somebody shows up and says, hey, let's do another one. And now you're looking at, looking at the next one. And so that's kind of how we look at this from a Trility perspective. It's definitely a process. There's no easy, there's no shortcut. There's process, there is repeatable, predictable, and we sort of move these things forward together along with our clients. So some of the things we're going to talk about today in that process is we're going to talk about discovery, how we sort of communicate, working with teams, consolidating, creating a single source of truth, and then fixing it for flexibility, making sure that once we have it out there, we can adjust and we can change and make sure that the teams can continue to be successful. So discovery, right? So we're going to start our process to move to a cloud, whether that's public cloud or we're going to move to a new private cloud. And one of the first steps that a lot of our clients that we work with tend to forget about is they forget about actually going back and looking and seeing where they've come from. They get very excited about moving on to that next step, and they've lost some of the things that they've done. And I'm sure this has happened to a lot of you, but road blindness is a great example of that. For me personally, when I'm driving on Interstate 80 between exit 106 and 117, I tend to just not even remember any of those towns, any of that stuff. And infrastructure and operations can work sometimes very much the same way, where things have just always worked, right? And we don't know that Jim on Tuesdays goes and he runs a script and that's the magic that everything does, or Jane on Thursday afternoons goes and she restarts a process. Those types of things tend to get forgotten because they just become second nature. So one of the things that we love to talk about with our clients is making sure that we go and we do some solid work in trying to remember what it was that we do, why we do it, and put those things together so that we kind of get rid of some of that road blindness. And that turns into really just that archaeological dig, right? So we're gonna break out the fedoras and the whips, and we're gonna do some fun stuff, in the deserts of whatever systems that exist. And this can happen both if you're already in the public cloud and you're looking to make a transition, or if you've got on-premise infrastructure, or even if you're sort of building out something new. There's probably a set of technology somewhere, unless you're a brand new startup, that you need to kind of go take a look at and really understand what exists. And so some of the questions that we like to ask is, how is it managed? What's there, right? What's being used? Who's doing the things? What are they doing, right? So this is, again, that example of Jim or Jane goes and they run that script or they reboot this server on a regular basis. I know personally, this was years ago, we had a stack of hardware in a co-location space, and we used a global file system, and instances would fight every now and again as far as who had the lock to be able to write to the file system. And the fastest way to fix it was to just shut it down and bring it up, right? We were looking at like 2 to 3 hours of downtime if we tried to work it, or maybe 5 minutes. And so we kind of got into the habit of just, we had a front storm, just down, up, and then we were good to go. And so those types of situations happen, and they kind of become second nature. And so we need to understand who's doing it, why they're doing it. It's also important to look and see what services and servers are running, and then why are they running, right? There's a lot of times where we'll get services that will stand up. We'll be working with clients, and we get to be the 2-year-old that kind of walks in and just says why a lot, right? Pure of heart. We're not judging. We're not asking, why would you have ever done that? It's just purely why, right? Why does that service exist? Why does this, why does this individual have to go do these things? And just so that we can understand, and it kind of helps our clients go through and go, oh, that's right. We put that in because of X, or we don't know why that's there. We need to do a little bit more research. And so this is definitely an incredibly important step that a lot of our clients tend to skip over, because again, they're very excited about moving to the cloud. They're very excited about moving on to that next step. And they tend to sort of forget where they've come from, and how they've gotten to where they are. That's helped them be successful. We want to make sure that we move that stuff forward. So once the inventory is complete, right? So once you understand where you've been, what you've got, who's doing it, all of those types of things, then you really need to ask yourself your question, where you want to go, right? And again, this is where a lot of organizations that we've worked with, there is a difference between where the where leadership wants to see things go, and maybe where the technology folks want to see things go. And sometimes it's technology folks want to just sprint forward, and the leadership just kind of wants to take the slow, and sometimes it's the other way, right? And so it's having that conversation again within the organization to say, okay, leadership wants to do X, the technology staff wants to do this, maybe your development teams want to do something else. Where do we as an organization, where do we want to go, right? And so we want to have that conversation. We want to take the time to go through that process to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Otherwise, if you don't ask that, what we tend to get into is this cycle, right? Where something's not working. We're not 100% sure what. We really haven't done an inventory. We just know something's not working. So a couple of folks go and they do some research, and we talk and we implement a solution. And we might fix that one little problem, but then things still just aren't working, right? So then we're right back to something's not working again, right? And because we've sort of skipped that inventory, and we've skipped the conversation about where we want as an organization to go, it can be hard for those individuals without the viewpoint of the larger organization or the larger team to really understand, hey, we're trying to get here, and you're focused on this one little iterative piece. So having those conversations is unbelievably important to make that transition to the cloud successful. So now like I said, having that conversation, right? So we have to communicate, and communication with people is always a challenge. we've been, in parts of organizations, I think we've all worked in organizations where when you go have a conversation, right, words and people, it gets really difficult. And so what we kind of like to do, again, really is that, like I said, is that two-year-old mentality of, we try to ask questions, right? If we make them questions, one, it's a little less declarative, obviously, because we're not saying, hey, we're going to go do this thing. Instead, it's, this is, why are you doing what you're doing? Can we solve this with the public cloud? If we're not talking about cloud specifically, and maybe we're talking about doing some containerization of an application, right? Is this going to help that problem? So instead of making the declarative, containerization will solve your problem. Well, that's a pretty bold statement, right? Instead, can we solve this with containerization, right? Can we? And then you have that conversation around that. And that makes it a lot easier for folks to engage in that conversation. And once you've had the information that from that inventory, and you know where you want to go, having those questions to ask just builds a good set of communication, a good set of next steps that you can sort of take. So again, when we hear we're doing this, or this is going to happen, or we're going to take this, we're going to use this tool, right? We kind of tend to try and shift it to, hey, here's our problem. I think we can solve it with X, or we can solve it with Y. Okay, let's have teams and let's go try this, right? And let's come back and we'll ask the question: did it solve it? Did we get what we wanted out of that? So again, it's turning that narrative around a little bit from this is what we're going to do to, we think this is going to solve the problem. Let's gather some information. Let's gather some stuff, and let's go back to the group. And again, it tends to make it a more inclusive process, which helps us be successful as we move forward. So we've talked about cloud, right? We want to do. There's a lot of organizations that want to move in that direction, and it can be a very positive experience, but it's also contextual. Some of the organizations we worked with, they get that first account and everybody's like, yes, we are in the cloud. And then they turn around and there are 50 accounts and have no idea where they all came from, right? So then you're like, okay, hold on, we restrict and we need to pull back. And then now, because you've had the burst and you've had the restriction, and now things kind of get confusing. And where a lot of organizations get a little frustrated is they believe that as soon as we get to the cloud, things are going to be better. And that's not always the case right away. So again, communication's the key, right? So having those conversations as an organization and saying, hey, we're going to take that first step. We expect there are going to be some issues. We expect that that's going to be some challenges. We may see these types of changes. We may see these types of challenges. Let's make sure that as we move forward, everybody is open about where we're going, how we're getting there. And then what we see when organizations sort of take those more open approaches, we don't see those giant bursts of everybody's got their own account. And then the chief information security officer finds out and suddenly nobody has an account, right? And then you have that back and forth. Instead, we like to, again, be very open, say, hey, we launched here. This is what we're trying to solve. Now we're going to launch this next thing and the next thing, and continue to communicate that within the organization. So people, right? So we've talked a lot about communication. We've talked a lot about being open, being transparent. People tends to be the biggest problem with any transition to the cloud. It's generally not technology, right? It's not the tools and the choices, it's people. So the common path tends to be very painful, right? So we have an IT, we have delivery teams, we have institutional knowledge with how we do things today. There's an announcement, leadership, hey, we're going a new direction, right? We're going in a new way. We're going to do a new thing. It's going to be awesome. Everybody's going to love it. And then there's this small little group that gets peeled off that becomes the innovation team, or the red team, or well, not red team, that would be a security thing, but they get some special label like, hey, this is the cloud team. They're going to do things. And oh, by the way, while they're doing it, we're going to have the rest of IT or the rest of the delivery teams. You're going to continue to manage things the old way, right? And you're going to continue to do things kind of as they sit, and they move that forward. And then you kind of you get an outcome, and then the old way sort of has to slide in somehow and become a part of that. And really what we've done here is we've taken a team and we've broken it up, right? There's lots of, I would imagine a lot of you have probably been a part of a situation where an innovation team comes in, right? And again, people are hard, right? They making sure that we don't end up with two territorial groups that are like, nope, this is mine now, you can't touch this, or this is mine now, you can't touch this. And so one of the things that we as Trility don't like to do is we don't like to come in and be the innovation team, right? Because we need to make sure that whatever it is that we've completed, or whatever work, again, from a project perspective that we complete, can be a part of the organization moving forward, and that the people that are working there are comfortable with that solution, that they understand how that solution works, and then they can take that over and they can manage and maintain that. And so something that we very much strive for, and we definitely encourage organizations that are going through this process, is really work very hard not to create a cloud team and a delivery team. Now, again, people are hard. So there are going to be some folks that are like, I've been doing it this way. This is the way I want to do it, and I don't want to change, right? You're going to find those types of individuals pretty quickly within the organization. And it very well may be that, hey, you know what, that's cool. You can just go ahead and continue to focus on this. And you're going to find other folks that are really, really excited about doing things in the cloud way, right? So that's where you kind of start to see some of that shift in your personnel. But as you go through that process and as you work through that, making sure that everybody has that opportunity to at least try the new stuff, work with the new stuff, and see how those things work, is definitely important. So one of the things that we like to do a lot is when we're building out organization, or not building out organization, but building out teams, do a lot of switching between teams, right? So maybe I've got 2 weeks, I'm going to do some cloud stuff, and then 2 weeks I'm going to help maintain some of the old, if it's VMware or some old system, right? So some of the older systems, I'm going to help manage and maintain things, those types of things. And if you can, try to help those individuals sort of switch back and forth so that they understand that there are, we still have to manage and maintain, because we still want to make money. We got to keep the business and the lights on, right? That's absolutely critical, and that has to happen. But at the same time, I want to make sure that some of those individuals, if they are interested, get the opportunity to work in some of the new technologies, and make sure that they're getting comfortable with the new system. So when there is that cutover, I'm not suddenly looking at a team that never got the opportunity and a team that gets to do everything that they've ever wanted to do, right? We want to make sure that we try to share those types of things.
Eric, sorry, we have a question from the field.
Sure.
I think relative probably to that last slide or points you're making, the question says, can you give an example of deteriorated morale or turnover from the group that's been left out? We'll have to maintain the new way that you've seen in any clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a couple of years ago. We were kind of brought in after the fact, right? So the innovation team had sort of already begun, and immediately it was very clear that the folks on the innovation team and the folks on the traditional team, nobody was talking to each other. Nobody liked each other, right? And so there was this animosity between the two teams. And at the end of the day, so in this particular case, there was essentially a shared core service that had, it was an Oracle database and had some other technology wrapped around it. And the innovation team needed to understand it better. And because they were sort of pitted against each other, it was really a long, drawn out process to be able to get information from one team to the other, because there was so much animosity, because they were really sort of fighting each other. It was like, no, we do it this way. It was like, yeah, but we're trying to do it a new way. And because of the way that leadership had sort of set those two teams apart, it was a very, very difficult process to get those things moved across. And unfortunately, in that case, there never really was a point where one team was successful. And the innovation team ended up finally just saying, well, fine, we'll build our own way and we'll do our own thing. And now we had to worry about, how do we transition data across, right? How do we get data from one system to the next? And really just made the process that much longer and that much more painful and more expensive for the organization to do. And so that's definitely something that, again, as organizations are starting to move to the cloud, people is always the one thing that it seems like clients tend to forget about, right? They get very excited and they go like, all right, we're going to go do this thing. And they kind of tend to pit groups against each other, and that just adds challenges and frankly costs time and money. Whereas if we had a different conversation from the outset, we can tend to solve more of those problems before they begin.
We have another question from the field. Besides rotating employees between teams, what recommendations or tactics does Trility see for upskilling or reskilling, quote unquote, traditional staff? And how do you get them the new skills while simultaneously delivering?
So one of the things that we like to do is we like to what we call is coach. Me personally, so I coach a lot of high school sports, and so coaching is definitely one of those things that we really enjoy doing at Trility itself, where it's not just, hey, I delivered this piece and I put it into production and then I walk away, but it's, hey, I'm doing this. We love to actually pair with individuals and help them understand what it is that we're doing, right? Provide a really just a risk-free environment for them to ask questions, right? Again, we're not here to judge, right? We've been doing this for a long time. We want to make sure that people get the opportunity to bring that forward if they so choose. So we absolutely take the tact of there is no stupid question. We're here to help. We're here to coach, right? And we want to make sure that you're comfortable in whatever it is that we're doing so that you can manage and maintain it moving forward. And so we definitely take pairing as a big part of that, where we will work again within teams instead of where we see on the screen here, where we're sort of a separate team that's doing one thing and then you've got another team doing another. So we really love to be together with that, if that makes sense.
Thank you, sir. I think you can proceed.
So, right. So now we know where we've come from, right? We can put the fedora and the whip away. We've had the conversation about where we want to go. We've had our conversation about people and what we're going to do with people, right? Now we need to have a more of a technology focused conversation. And this is where we want to consolidate, right? So when you move to the public cloud, everything you do will cost you money. It will cost you every day and every hour and in some case every microsecond that you're doing it, right? So a really important part of that conversation then has to be, how do I consolidate, right? How do I bring if I've had hardware build up in a data center over years and years, right? That can be quite the sprawl. If I tried to pick that up and drop that in a public cloud, that's going to be extremely expensive. So I need to go back and I need to see what I can consolidate, right? Do I really need 8 web servers, or can I get away with 1? Do I really need extremely large database servers, or can I use something that will auto scale as necessary? And so the consolidation process, right? So can I do this in a single pipeline? Can I consolidate some of my builds into more of a single process or a set of libraries? Can I make these things smaller, right? So or can I utilize some of the public cloud tools to allow me to auto scale these types of things, right? When we did what I would call classic infrastructure, we had to plan for our worst day, right? So if our worst day was going to require 10 web servers, I had to have all 10 and they had to be hot all the time because I had to be prepared for that. Well, when you move to the public cloud, you don't have to plan for 10. You can have 1 and then you can expand to 10 when you need it and come back down. There's a challenge to that, right? Is the application prepared to do that? Is the database prepared to take that type of a scale? So you ask sort of different questions of your application developers, and you ask different questions of some of your data teams to be able to make sure that those services work that. But again, it's back to asking questions again. It's, hey, can we take this and make it smaller? Do we really need all of these things? And if the answer is yes, cool. You've asked, you've answered, you move forward, right? But if the answer is like, hey, you know what? We only have high traffic 2 days a year. Let's really consolidate this down and let's really find a way to make this thing scale up and scale down. Because again, as you move to the public cloud, every microsecond you're in there, you're getting charged, right? So as an example, so one of the clients that we worked with, they were actually already in the public cloud. And they were moving to a new set. So they had kind of a situation where they had built out a set of infrastructure. They built out a platform that they were deploying things to, and they weren't very happy with it, right? And they had sort of some account sprawl. And so what we really, they needed to understand how their accounts worked, how the networking worked. So again, we really started off with that discovery, right? We needed to understand, what do you have in the cloud? Where is it at? What accounts are you interacting with? How are the permissions set up for those accounts? What services do you have deployed into those areas? And really had to sit down and do a solid inventory. And there were some things that we discovered along that way that were surprises to some folks. Because again, you get that road blindness, right? Like we deployed this 6 months ago and nobody's touched it since. And it's just working. It's just doing its thing. And you kind of go back and look and you're like, oh, I didn't remember that's how we did that. That's not, that's not going to be a secure way for us to accomplish that. So then we communicated and we sort of defined, right? So in this case, it was, what problems or issues, right? Why do you want to go through this process of consolidating? What is it, right? So in some of their words, they had too much sprawl from the account structure. They weren't comfortable with the number of accounts, and it felt like every time they had a new thing, they were adding a new AWS account, and that had a big thing. Their applications were getting larger. So in this case, they were doing things directly on an EC2 instance. And so every time their build process would build out a machine image with that app on it, and it was very painful to add a new machine image type. And so they just kept making their applications bigger and bigger because it was painful to build a new one. So again, that build process, there were only two people that really knew how any of the infrastructure, how anything was working, right? That can absolutely be a challenge, especially when both of them would like to take a vacation. People love to leave, right? I enjoy getting some free time whenever Rhonda lets me do things. So any of those types of things, right? So that was an issue that they wanted to. And management and the development teams really felt like they just needed something easier to manage. They couldn't really put their finger on what easier was because, again, they didn't really understand how they got into where they were, but they just felt like they needed something easier. So we kind of went through that. We just had those types of conversations, and it wasn't a real long process. It was really just about a week of just having some good, solid meetings and conversations, and really gathering information about what they felt like the problems were, talking with all the different levels of the organization, from leadership all the way down to the IT folks that were managing things. Once we sort of had that, we kind of came down, we consolidated, and we're like, okay, so these are some of the problems we've identified, right? These are some of the areas that we can work on. What do you want to do first, right? We can't really pick all of these all at once, especially since you only have two people that are really doing things. What are your hotspots? What are the things you really want to solve? And in this case, the application growth was one that really concerned both management, concerned the developers, and concerned the IT folks. So we asked the question, we're like, well, can we consolidate these into some containerized deployments, right? Can we use, in this case, we were using Elastic Container Service. Can we use ECS and Amazon to alleviate some of that, right? And so we did a 2-week spike, built some of those applications into some containers, kind of redefine their way that their pipelines would work, and then allowed them to build another app using that same pipeline. And we sort of answered that question like, yeah, that's going to be a lot easier for us to build that out. It's going to be repeatable. And there are some well-worn strategies for how we deploy and manage things to an ECS cluster. So that was sort of an immediate thing that we could sort of take on. We helped them with. And in this case, we didn't just build it and then hand it to the two people. We paired with the two people, right? So we were working with them to build this stuff out, and part of their team, so that when this was over, it wasn't our success in terms of Trility, it was the organization's success because their individuals had done that work and they were comfortable with how that had been deployed, right? So they understood, hey, I get now what you've done with the build process. I see how we're building those out. And in one case, one of the individuals did not have any experience with Docker, had never touched it before, right? So that was a big learning process for that individual. And we were there to be helpful and supportive of that and make sure that they understood what it was we were doing, how we were doing it, why we were doing it, right? And just really gave them an open forum to ask questions without having to feel like, all right, as soon as I ask this question, this guy's going to turn around to my boss and say, wow, this individual just has no idea what they're doing. You got to get rid of them. That's not what we're about. Instead, we're very much about, hey, open, honest, let's be there. Let's answer your questions. Let's get you where you need to be so that where you're comfortable. And it was a great experience. And in fact, in this particular case, the organization was very happy with that, and they had us stay for another one, and we helped sort of pick off more and more of these problems, and to help those individuals be very comfortable with what it was when it was being deployed.
Eric, we have another question.
Sure.
From the field. Cloud-based security is different than on-prem. How much of the environmental prep does Trility apply to cloud security during the cutover readiness? Does that focus still apply in post-launch monitoring?
So security is number one in everything that we do. So it absolutely applies. And when I say that, and we'll talk a little bit about infrastructure as code and some of the ways that we sort of manage and deploy those things. But security is absolutely critical. And unfortunately, security tends to be one of the first things that we kind of go rogue blind to, right? So we'll deploy an IAM, an identity and access management structure out, and then we'll forget that we did it, and we'll move on to the next thing, and we'll kind of do things, right? And so instead, what we like to do as Trility is we validate and revalidate those things on a very regular basis. And so we want to make sure that essentially every time we're adding a new application, we'll go back and look at the roles. We absolutely want to make sure that there are audit trails in place, right? So one of the first things that we do is we will obviously hook up CloudTrail and Amazon, other services and other clouds, but not just hook them up, but then build some alerts, help individuals that are going to maintain these things long term build some alerts. Then we'll see some of those alerts come through, and we'll work through those issues together and make sure that those are always top of mind, because security is everything, right? The first time you have a policy goes out there that opens up an S3 bucket, you're going to end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal saying, hey, so and so just had an S3 bucket that was open. So you have to keep that top of mind present all the time in what you're doing. I think that answered the question. I think I might have started rambling a little bit. So security is a big deal, right? That has to be number one, because you can't, as soon as you have a breach, you've lost the faith of your development teams, you've lost the faith of your organizational leaders, you've lost the faith of anybody that was utilizing that service out there, right? So you have to take that at the utmost highest priority. It has to be the security and what you do. That doesn't mean that everybody is perfect all the time, but it has to be top of mind, and you have to be thinking about it. So even when you build out a test service, for example, so when we're talking about this containerized deployment, right, and we're building a new ECS cluster that's how we're going to deploy our containers, that's got some EC2 instances, lots of different stuff, right? At no point in that journey do you just give it access to everything and then we say, hey, we'll pare it down, right? Instead, you give it access to nothing, you see what fails, and then you add the permissions, knowing what it is that you're doing along the way, right? And so that's even in the process of development, it's never just a wide open star, hey, whatever it needs, and I'll pare it down later, because I guarantee you'll never pare it down, right? I think we've all been there where I'll give this person administrative access, and then tomorrow I'll go back and I'll restrict them again. Realistically, you won't. So again, as we go through this process, as we go through building these types of things out, security has to be the first and foremost thing that you consider every time you take that step. And again, when we're pairing with those individuals that are part of that organization, they may not have that experience, they may not have that mindset. So it's working with those individuals to make sure that they understand, especially in the public cloud, that's a super critical thing. Moving on. So, by the way, plug for Apple TV if you haven't seen Ted Lasso. Good show, great stuff. So Coach Beards, that's good stuff. Anyway, so we solved it, right? So we've consolidated some stuff. Now what do we do? What do we do for the next problem, right? So that's the continuous step. One is to never assume that you're done, right? Well, there's never a point where you're going to be like, all right, I'm done. It's over. Like, this is the greatest thing. I give my soccer kids in high school right now a hard time because we love to make that pass, and we just kind of stand and be like, wow, that was the greatest pass ever. Like, I don't need to do anything anymore because I just made this amazing 10-foot pass, instead of making the pass and then making a move to get open for the next one, right? So instead of doing a 1-2, we just end up doing a 1. Technology is very much the same, right? Sometimes people just tend to like, oh, I just deployed the greatest service ever, I'm done, right? Instead, it's I deployed the greatest service ever. Tomorrow morning, I'm gonna get up, I'm gonna deploy another one, right? I'm gonna go build the next thing. I'm gonna go see what the next challenge is to solve and what I can do to make it better. And so that's definitely something that's going to be super important. So how do we do these things, right? So we've talked about all of communication. We've talked about people. We've talked about some of that process. How would Trility then do a lot of these types of things, right? How would we actually implement these things? And this is where we get to everything is code. So we've all heard of infrastructure as code. I'm a huge fan of everything is code. So when we get started in a process, that doesn't tend to be right. So that's that person that either SSHs onto a machine and they do that one thing, or the application developer, maybe they've got to go and they've got to click a button, or they've got to add in some information and be able to do a build, right? We want to start to take a look at those things, and we want to make sure that those things get transitioned into code, and that everything that we do is software, from the infrastructure to from the security to the application deployments to the whole stack. Everything is code. One of the reasons why is that when we go back and we do that inventory again, we don't want to make that process painful again, right? And so when we have that single source of truth, sometimes we will lose the why. Documentation is always the thorn in everybody's side, but you should never lose the how or the what, right? So when we talk about we're going from A to Z, and sometimes with existing infrastructure, you're going to get in, you're going to like, okay, I know we started with a server and now we ended up with 30. How did we build those out? What did we do to build those out, right? And that knowledge may be gone, whether you have had turnover inside of the organization, whether those people just plain forgot, right? There are things that I did yesterday I don't remember doing. And so that tends to happen. And so when you get that A to Z, you're missing B to Y. That inventory process, that discovery process can be very, very painful, because that knowledge is just gone. Infrastructure is code. Everything is code. You might lose the why, right? You might go, okay, well, why in the world did we add this? But you're going to be able to see every step along the way from A to Z. You're going to be able to see, we did this. This is how we did it. And this is what we did to accomplish that task. And so your inventory is really just going to be your Git log, or whatever source code management tool you're using. It's going to be the log of, okay, we started here, then we did this, then we did this. And if you're following a peer review process, right, you're going to be able to say, okay, so-and-so put this in as a change. Jane took a look at it. She thought it was cool, or maybe she had a problem with it and made a couple of comments on it. Bob came in and said, hey, that looks good to me. Jane finally, she was cool with it. And so she approved it after some changes, and then she merged it in, and then Jim came along and he did the deployment, right? So you're going to be able to see all of those steps along that process. And if those individuals are still there, you can go have that conversation, say, hey, we're trying to figure out what we did here. And like, oh, I can look at the code and it will jog my memory right away. Hey, this is what I did. And this is, and that's where you can kind of sometimes discover the why if you didn't have the documentation there. So, and then once you've kind of got everything as code, then we go right into the CICD. And CICD is almost one of those terms, kind of like DevOps, that's almost lost almost lost its meaning, right? It's just become everybody's, well, CICD. It's almost a sound, and more than it is a term. Continuous integration is definitely going to be the easier part of continuous integration, continuous deployment. There are some organizations we get into and we're like, yep, once we get this process going and we start to see this go, you'll be able to deploy to production multiple times a day, and immediately you'll just see eyes glaze over, like, no, that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen overnight. It's a process, right? So let's get integration completed. Let's be able to get our pipelines put into a place where we can do our integration, we can do our testing, right? And then we add some testing, we add more testing. Now we're comfortable doing an automated deployment to dev, right? Cool. So now every time there's a build, we automatically deploy to a dev environment. We have some more tests. We've added some more testing, right? We put some more things in place. We've got our dev environments are in code now. We understand how those get deployed. Now we're going to deploy you out to a test environment or to a user acceptance environment. So the one thing to remember when we get into those CICD conversations with organizations is to let them know that continuous deployment for a production environment is absolutely the goal. And that goal is achievable and you will get there. But again, it's a process, and it requires communication, it requires effort, and you have to go through that process. And again, eyes wide open. And then, you'll get to the point where you're deploying to production 3 or 4 times a day. And it's that first time that it happens, it'll scare the heck out of you. And then like exit 109, man, I don't even remember it was there, right? So those types of things are definitely important. And again, if everything is code, you can always go back and you can see, all right, here's how we got to where we needed to get to. All right, I can peel all of those layers back very quickly and very easily. I can see who did the work, who approved the work, and we can see how we got to where we needed to get to, so that you can then implement the next one. So, and I just explained all of the slides, so that was a bad job on my part, getting a little ahead of myself. But Romp Appeal. So I grew up watching infomercials. So Romp Appeal was always a good one for me. The set it and forget it. One of the things that you can't get into the mentality of set it and forget it, right? You have to get into a mentality where we're doing work, we're reviewing the work that we've done. We're always in that process of making sure that security is where we need it to be, right? That's something that changes literally every day, multiple times a day. So we need to make that top of mind. We need to make sure that we're keeping very aware of what that is. We can't just set our security policy and then just forget it because, hey, we've got a security policy set. The same thing is true with infrastructure, right? Amazon changes. It probably changed 10 things every day, and probably sometimes before breakfast. So that's another thing that if you're in an Amazon world, you need to make sure that you're continuing to review those things, see what new services are being deployed. Will they work for your organization? How much effort will it take to implement those types of things? And not every good thing or not every new thing that Amazon does is going to work. And that's fine, right? It's just a smorgasbord. The same thing is true with Azure, GCP, or any other public clouds. But there's a lot of new stuff that's coming. So you can't get into the mindset of Romp Appeal where you just set it and forget it, like, boom, done. It has to turn into, all right, we did this, all right, and then next month we're going to come back and take a look at it. Or, I just got an email from Amazon that there's a new way that they do CloudWatch monitoring. Cool, let's take a look at that and let's peel that off and do a spike on it for a couple of days. That rolls all the way back to communication and making sure that the leadership and stakeholders, all the way down to the individuals that are hands on keyboard, that all of those individuals know that, hey, we're moving into a space that does evolve and does change, and we need to make sure that we are accounting for taking the time and taking the effort to do those types of things. So, any other questions?
We do have one. Eric, also, I didn't know that you were going to give us marriage advice this morning. I appreciate it. But since you said CICD is a sound and not really a word with meaning anymore, evidently I must be saying CICD to my wife occasionally, because I think I'm getting sounds without any meaning. Anyhow, this question is kind of heavily encompassing. There's actually a couple layers of questions with this one, but how regularly do you encounter a client who's migrated to the cloud or is in the process of doing so, and they've failed to see the benefits they expect?
Quite a bit, and it's usually cost. So it's usually they'll get on the AWS specifically, and I spend a lot of time in AWS, so that's where a lot of my examples come from. But they'll get on the cost estimator and they'll plug some stuff in and like, oh, it's only going to cost me X per month. And then they'll get in there and it's twice that, or it's 3 times that, right? And it's generally what it is. I would never say it's people being lazy, but it's definitely somebody that goes and builds an EC2 instance that they're doing something with, and they leave it up just because it's easier for them to leave it up. Well, dude, every hour that's on, that's the gas meter's running, right? And so that's definitely something that we do see a lot, is organizations will get to the cloud and then they'll be like, this is not at all what I expected this to cost me. It's costing me way, way more, right? And so an early conversation with us then goes right to discovery. but then consolidation and looking at what they have deployed and trying to understand how we bring that down to a more manageable piece, and take advantage of the deployable or of the elasticity of the cloud.
So what assumptions do you think go into, I'm asking this question as a corollary to that. What assumptions do you think frequently have gone into that, cost estimation that then proved to be untrue, and therefore the bill is 2x or 3x?
And a lot of times they're missing the learning curve, right? So especially if I have somebody that has done, things for quite a while, and they're moving into the cloud, right? There's a learning curve for everybody to do that. And that learning curve can sometimes can take weeks or months. And in that process, you can easily make mistakes that cost you a significant amount of money, right? So again, you go to that cost estimate and be like, I need, I've got 3 web servers, I got a big database server, boom, I got it in and I'm going. Well, Amazon's going to cost you input output, right? So if you've got a lot of data transfer in and out of that window, there's that meter's running, right? If it takes me 2 months to figure out how managing EC2 instances works, and then I missed how using an auto scaling group would allow me to scale those up and down, right? Well, then I've paid for all of those services. RDS instances. Without some proper testing and seeing how RDS manages things in Amazon versus what I would expect a regular database server to do. Sometimes I don't need the same horsepower one-to-one, but I'll go ahead and launch that massive server in Amazon, or massive RDS instance in Amazon, and I'm paying for it while I do that testing, right? A big thing that we like to do with organizations once we've gotten to a point where they're comfortable and they're sort of mature. If I get everything built as code, at 5 o'clock when everybody goes home, I can shut most of my Amazon services down, right? I don't need my development environment up when nobody's there, right? And so that's another thing that organizations tend to do is they tend to forget that, if I only have people working for, say, a 10-hour window a day, that means that I'm paying for a 14-hour window when nobody's using things. I'm spending money on that, right? And so it's having those types of conversations, and those are things that frankly you don't tend to think about when you're moving from a thing where server sits in the back, or I've got a server sitting in a stack somewhere. You tend to forget about the fact that you don't need those things on 24 hours a day, right? So that's generally where we tend to find those types of things. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I think that the corollary question that Emily asked was, in that case, and you talked about some of the issues to address to solve the problem when cost overrun is an issue, but how difficult is it to then help a customer get some of their cost run managed a little bit tighter, like finding those opportunities, right? Whether it be the auto scaling side or taking advantage of the elastic ephemeral nature that they aren't, or maybe reserved instances in some cases, like how in general, how difficult is it to help them then get their expectations back in line and maybe pursue some cost savings?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's not generally as difficult as you would think, right? So the biggest thing is, it tends to be, honestly, is just sitting down with the bill with the people that are sort of managing the cloud and saying, and just, again, not from a judgmental perspective, just asking the why. And you'll tend to ferret out a lot of those questions, like, why is our EC2 cost so high? And somebody will go and they'll sit and look at it and be like, oh, I had all of these things working. Whoops, my bad, right? So then you start to pare those things down. So you pick off I guess I would say the low hanging fruit pretty quickly when you just literally sit down with the bill and ask why. The next step then is when you look at auto scaling groups, or you look at using the ephemeral nature of the cloud, that is as an application question. But most of the time what we see is those applications, there's a way to do it. That's where you just have to have those conversations with the application developer. Say, hey, I'm running this web app. Right now we have 6 servers that always run it. Can I run it on 1 and expand out to 7 or expand out to 8 and then contract down? And so that's going to have to be a conversation with some of those application developers. In our experience, in most cases, those are pretty easy transitions for folks to do. Because again, it's just a matter of understanding how the app works, how it's being configured. and then utilizing the tools within Amazon to make sure that that gets deployed the way it needs to, so that it can be successful. And so we haven't run into a lot of cases where that transition has been difficult. It occasionally happens, right? You'll occasionally get an application that there's a lot of communication back and forth between like the first instance that's up and then the next instance and the next instance. But if you sit down and break it down, and again, you take that everything is code mentality, we've only come across maybe one or two that I can think of off the top of my head in the last 10 or so years that we kind of had to throw our hands up and say, yeah, we're gonna have to rewrite that app. Generally, there generally is a way to do it. You just have to approach it with that open mentality and have those conversations.
Eric, we'll take one more question and then we should move on to Cory's presentation. But in conversations with non-technology leaders, what are some of the more impactful reasons for moving to the cloud that you've found particularly influential with that audience, the non-technology leader cloud audience?
So a lot of the folks that we'll have those conversations, they get very excited about cost. And so that's where cost ends up hurting them the most, is that they'll get in there and they'll see the cost and they're like, whoa, time out. Like that's not at all. And so what we like to maybe have more of a conversation around is process improvements and flexibility, right? So they're generally, when you look at the silos of development and the silo of infrastructure and the silo of data, what we like to have conversations around with some of the leadership is cloud can, if you approach it openly, cloud can sort of help you break some of those silos down to where your developers can have some access to understand more of how infrastructure works, and your infrastructure folks can learn more about how those applications are deployed, because they're going to have to, so they can do them in an auto scaling or do them in a maybe even in a serverless capacity, right? And your data folks are going to have to understand how some more of that infrastructure works in the other way, right? So cloud tends to be a great way for silos to sort of break down, because it's no longer, I had to order hardware and it took me 6 weeks to get it in. This is what you have to work inside of these bounds. Now it's a much broader conversation about, well, what do you really need, right? And so what I tend to see, and what I intend to enjoy with those conversations with organizational leaders, is this is an opportunity for your people to get better and to know more about the stack and the systems that they work with. So instead of, I do Linux, that's what I do, you start to see people go, hey, you know what? I may not be able to sit down and write the code for the application, but I now understand what it requires better. And I've had conversations with those developers now, and they know me and I know them, and we've built a relationship. So now when the developer's like, gosh, it'd be really cool if we could try this technology, like we want to do something with Lambda in a serverless world. As an infrastructure guy, instead of just saying, yeah, but I do Linux, right? Now I've built that relationship. I can go have that. I can go play with that a little bit, and I can help them with the knowledge that I bring in terms of stability and security, and pair that with their application development experience. And so the conversations we love to have with organizations is more about really bringing your people forward, building more relationships within your teams, and tearing some of those silos down, and building, I lost my train of thought. Building richer experiences, not just for the people who use your applications, but the people who build them and manage and maintain them.
So Cory's going to help us fix this issue or prevent it from happening again, as if it were set and forgotten.
Okay.
Mr. Brody.
Thanks, Brody. Good morning, everyone. Today, I wish to talk about something I hold in high respect. It's maintenance of what Eric just described on all the cloud, whatever form you're in type thing. So maintenance is a big deal, right? So often it's described as activities that occur after a failure, right? Well, let's work into that. So why is maintenance a security by design must have? So in order to ensure your integrity and durability of your data, your systems need regular, on-purpose management. Your teams need to know all aspects of the systems. And thinking this way combats the cloud being sold as a set it and forget it. To bring that around there. So Our problem statement for today that we're going to talk about is going to be if you've implemented a solution using a vendor or contractor or a combination of both. Some time has passed since this has been installed, and your team needs to do a change, a modify, or even an upgrade of the software. Basically, you need to do something because your business has changed. So remember, our system's been running, it's been installed, and we haven't touched it yet. So from implementation, our solution ran without the fail, never needed to be managed, and typical daily administration was not necessary. Doesn't mean it wasn't in use. People were putting in users or secrets or however it was going. But what happens is when all of this runs perfectly, this always leads to the time constraints between bandwidth challenges within your team when something does arise. So we have a project example coming up here. And I've been privileged to work on many projects in the past 20 years, where I was afforded the chance to hand projects and responsibilities of the systems deployed to a team or teammates throughout. In this example, we're going to talk about HashiCorp Vault. HashiCorp provides many products, and the company has done a great job of letting you do this quickly with scripts, and they have a tremendous presence in open source, providing installs and deploy scripts. So the client that we're talking about was ready for added features on an upgraded version of this enterprise version. As we know, even with Vault and all the other software providers out there, today's software rapidly changes. We know that services are expected to be available always. So to set up the scene here a little bit, we have the first problem come out was we deployed the scripts. It ran on the servers, not me, but somebody else did, right? And it ran without issues. So number 2 comes up, and we've never touched it. We didn't have to do any upgrades or updates or anything like that. So 3 comes down later, months later, we need to modify this. We found something that we want to do next. However, there's a 4th problem coming in. Remember, some time has occurred, maybe a year, 2 years. What happens when that person who worked in this initially didn't share how? They didn't really write notes or anything, and they've transitioned out. We've heard this before from Eric's talk, right? So what happened is we took a focused discovery and definition, and that created our path forward. Working with the team in the beginning to solve the update and upgrades of the Vault task that we needed to change, the team took some time to find what the current status and inventory and ask themselves, where do you want to be? With the end goal in mind, we have our desired outcomes that we needed. We wanted an updated pipeline to deliver this software. We know that we needed a new version to add the functionality that we're after. And then we needed to avoid the problem in the future of our team not knowing how to do it. So what we knew, obviously, the pipeline needed to be updated. We needed to do the version upgrade. So this was going to affect customers. We're going to have an outage. We're going to have downtimes, probably change windows. We needed to make sure that the team had the input on the design of the cluster of the systems out there. We're going to dive into that pretty big. It's hard for me not to talk about it right now, but we're going to dive. So then lastly, we have a training in order to maintain this solution, right? So we want to be hands-on. But we had constraints. We had a limited amount of team members that when we went and talked to them, they didn't have the time for anything. So let's dive into that. 4 areas that we want to address in the contract is Trility coming in, and we're going to help you out, right? So what we're going to cover today is going to be the address, the maintenance in the contract. Remember, maintenance being a full word, very loaded. 2, we're going to require those responsible to engage in this design. We're going to allocate the people's time for engagement, and then we're going to consider how the team learns. Okay, so number 1, address the maintenance in the contract. On your first 3 topics here, you're going to have the installation of it for the system to be running. Then we're going to think about what the upgrades are. When is the next one? How will your team be ready? And then maintenance of it. Or I'd like to call that growth type of thing, more of a maintenance in this category. So the growth keeps tabs on the metrics to adjust the systems as it needs and it arises. So let's have a conversation overall, at least have the conversation of maintenance in the contract. Who will we call? A technical specialist. We want to know that knows our environment, right? So the contractor that needs to be there, they're going to study, they're going to know. So what happens afterwards, after it's installed? Can we call them, type of thing? Next, can we have an engineer time, not just for the 24 support break fix era, but what if we just be able to call and bounce off ideas for the wall, and then the team can decide things? And then can we have the monthly digest sent? It's kind of critical to know what new features are coming out, or maybe security bug updates, things like that for the software. Is it the contracting company, or is it going to be the vendor, you know, or in conjunction with that? That's where the partner system comes in, right? Okay, so two, let's require those responsible to engage in the design. Very important here. You know your people. Your people know your customers better than the contractors, right? Or the vendors or the consultants. Research and ask the questions that are critical about the solution, right? How critical is uptime for your customers? How much traffic are you going to have? So questions on the flow. Let's talk about data. Data's coming in, data's coming out. Where's the security of that? Where's the backups? How are your customers going to use it? Is it going to be public or private? What are the peak hours and usage times? These are kind of basic questions, right? We're kind of hammering down through here, but if we understand the customers, how they're using it, we're going to be able to serve better for them and scalability. So how do you see yourself working a change window? Remember, we're talking about maintenance. So what happens when we do an upgrade? Do we have to file an outage? Can it be completely pure cloud and deploy a production, you know, 2 or 3 times a day? And then finally, imagine it's 2 a.m. services go down. Now what do we do? All right.
Cory, sorry, we have a question from the field. Can you give an example on this project of input from the client team that provided helpful insight in creating the design of the solution?
Yeah, I think a great example in this particular case was, so we deployed a new system to replace a system. And once we learned, we were back in the cost savings type thing. So we didn't deploy the whole scalability of it. It didn't really seem, we checked CPU uses, we checked disk, we checked lots of things. It was not overrun whatsoever. When we implemented the new version of it, that software, it actually done a lot more calls to the internals and back. But we found it was going slow. Customers were kind of complaining, saying, hey, our requests are going too slow. So we got to looking, and we found that they were doing 6 million calls per month to this system. That was unknown. So let's put that in perspective of the maintenance. If we weren't looking at it every day, we didn't know who was using it or how was using it, type of thing. We didn't know that it was 6 million calls per month. It's a tremendous amount, right? So once we figure that out, we actually work with that customer of theirs, and we pared it down a little bit. We put a little time constraints around each call and stuff like that. So it was a great example to diverge and change from that from management. Okay, thank you for that, by the way. One thing we want to talk about here, this is kind of jumping around just a little bit, but I'd like to kind of hammer it home a little bit, is just because we can does not mean we should, right? So simplicity in designing of the systems, of the install. Let's take a look at 3 topics I like to talk about is the pros and cons from release information. What's coming down the pipe? How does it work? What's the software? What's it like from the vendor, right? Second is factor information in from the customer. So kind of feeds back to that question coming in. What are the customers using? How do we need to build this to be up 24/7 type of proper servicing? So, and then third, avoid complex scripts that do it all. Excuse me. So something we kind of do here, a little bit of a model at Trility is the KISS factor, right? So keep it simple, silly. Quick analogy here. Seriously, it's easier to fix. It's easier to teach, and it's easier to understand, especially at 2 a.m. when your customers are having an outage problem. So, okay, so allocate people's time for the engagements. I'm going to slow down here just a bit. let's all be, so you have a team. That team's already has responsibilities, right? But we need to have them involved. So the IT professionals, anybody I've ever come across, they've liked to learn by being involved. Let them help by using their own keyboards. That kind of puts it into their mind a little bit, right? Now we need to talk about, make sure the managers know and give the time of the hands on the keyboards. I know that they have their calendars and whatnot, but the people also need additional time to run those keyboards. So let's talk about that. A team's typical day, and what we found was going on when we were working with this client was we have, we have 3 big blue dots up here, right? With meetings, support tickets, steady flows of emails. But you can pepper in a bunch of other little dots in between there for any walk-ups or any other, the task that happens and backups or whatever that does that. So, right. So how do we afford time for the team? So in most everyone we ever come into, but in this particular example, we actually set consistent times and intervals to work with people. Your entire team is responsible, right? Using knowledge transfer through paired programming sessions and lunch and learns, we became very hands-on together. So why this way? Any member of your team can then push the button. If the deploy breaks, right then together, walk through it and repair it, troubleshoot it out loud and engage. Have a great opportunity. This is a great opportunity to share and learn, right? So the integration of this method enables memories to stick, questions to be asked. Also, very importantly, that the interactions to your or their customers, this leads to gathering far more details on the needs of hosting things. So Eric kind of alluded to this before, right? We have vacations or the proverbial bus accident, if you will. We didn't want to put that up on the slide here, but a team is not an individual. Plan for those vacations. What you want is your people to be comfortable running these commands and knowing exactly where the logs are, if there's trouble, or how to deploy or even upgrade. Everybody needs to know. And then finally, the 4th area here, we're going to consider how the team learned. This is very important when we were instructing and building out this new thing. So again, everybody had things they were doing. So we forced kind of time in to do a sharing sessions, learnings, and things like that. So what we also learned was we made the documentation. We did a bunch of recordings. Actually, we were doing Zoom sessions, actually pair programming over Zoom, and we recorded those. We recorded the deployments too. And then we created videos on that, videos of it. And then we made those the baselines for requirements. So any new member could come into the team, pick up, take some time on the videos, and we could go on with that. The expectations that are met when we're doing this, it's critical. It's historically proven, and it creates the momentum for the rest of your task going forward, whether it's service or not. So I can't express this enough. Paired programming, put it together by being together, challenge each other, and use the keyboard. Push that button. Fail early and fail fast. So as we keep adding these idealisms coming down through this, if we have your team keep the tides on their own systems and software, this gives you the confidence that your growth of CPUs, your disk and network and bandwidth are working. You have backups that you know that you can go back for. You can even practice the DR recovery times and things like that. And of course, digital exhaust. Logs are one of the most important things, especially in cloud. We can't walk to the data center and grab something, right? We need to know what's going on. So we'll continue that. Building onto that. So again, we're kind of stackpiling a triangle here. The security and compliance then gains your stability when you have your whole team knowing what's going on. You ensure the tools and deployments are not modified outside of your CICD, and your infrastructure as code is working through the pipelines, not outside modifications, right? We're talking about using the approval gates of code review, using pull requests, and this avoids someone slapping a Band-Aid on something that they just randomly walk in and need to fix something, right? We want to avoid that pretty much at all costs. So finally, then teams can then monitor your own cluster health. Obviously, this is kind of going down through it, right? So they can execute their own recovery actions properly. Notice we got little adjustments of the knobs in the cloud, right? So we're talking about that. And your team can push the buttons, turn the knobs, and make any adjustments for the smooth, uninterruptible, successful runtime. And we kind of depicted down here as this is a great little picture. So one person knows how to do that, right? But if we're sharing session, doing that, we gain multiple people and finally end up with a big team for successful knowledge transfer over there. Then one of the things that final thoughts kind of thing is I like to say, I love to fish, by the way. It's one thing I do. So I like to teach people how to fish. Not every consultant or contractor has this in mindset. There's been many times where I've been complimented by say, thanks for going the extra mile. So what we wanted to point out here is find partners who care about you, know. For some, the goal is always to have more billable hours or get some things migrated for you to go to the cloud so the cloud can start billing you or their services can start billing you. We're not there for that. We want to make sense of what they do, right? So working with each one of these people and the teams, individuals, even the managers all the way through, let them understand how it's going and what's working. And of course, find partners who care about you. Success to me means with them. I kind of take that personally. It's good getting a review. At Trility, we have kind of a review or an email system that you can come say. And there was one lady that gave me a props, and it was very, very dear to me. So I ran through that really quick. Thanks for coming along. But do you have any questions at this point in time?
We have a few that have been submitted, Cory. I'll start with this one here. I've seen some very large organizations declaring multi-cloud success recently. Is this realistic for organizations that are not enterprise Fortune 500 class?
That's a hard question, right? Because cloud can be as small or as big as you want it to be. We have seen a mixture of both success and failures on both of those. A lot of times what we hear about multi-cloud is, and I'll kind of be honest and candid about this, is it's really easy to say that I'm running my email Office 365 out of Azure and I'm running some servers in AWS, right? So that is technically multi-cloud, but are they truly having a database in AWS, one in GCP and one in Azure, and then migrating all the way through? I'm not sure about that. So I'm not one to follow to actually subscribe to, hey, this is what we're doing, we're multi-cloud type thing. So yes, you can. It's tough, but you definitely can. But let's kind of break it down to what services are being out there.
And then this one I think could be you or Eric or both of you, Cory. But do you guys see a use case where getting started or piloting in the cloud makes the most sense? In other words, is there a particular place that you would recommend, like as the starting point pilot for cloud?
Oh, let me kick that one off. Eric and I actually worked together 8 years ago at a startup, if you will, and it did some interesting things, and some leadership had some choices there on different clouds of what they were doing, right? First and foremost, the cloud is awesome to get into first easily, right? You can spin up something, throw out your code, and deploy and work something. The thing that you can get into trouble though is by trying 3 different types of clouds or different brands of clouds or something like that, and not keeping ties. We're going back to the system of security is number one, right? So make sure you're not getting hacked. Make sure there's nothing open and SSH is closed and things like that for the bare minimum type thing. Do you have anything?
Yeah. So I guess to add to that, as with most things, it's contextual, right? If you have the opportunity to do greenfield work in the cloud, and that's where you want to go. Like the organization has decided, hey, you know, whether we're doing stuff with AS400 and that just isn't going to translate, so we need to do brand new development in the cloud, and we need to build something new. If that's the direction you're going, I would absolutely recommend starting small, right? So the more complicated the application, the more challenges obviously you're going to experience. And so if you can start something small and build knowledge, right? So we didn't send 50 people to the moon, we sent 3 and 2 landed, right? So it's taking those small steps and being successful at those and building confidence as you go. That's going to be a big part of that. If the organization, whether it's maybe their co-location space is out of contract and they want to get out, right? So they're going to pick up and lift and shift and do something like that. Again, the smaller bites that you can take out of that, and the more experience you can build as an organization, and the more comfortable you're going to be as you move forward. And so context is everything, but that's I think my biggest takeaway would be is start small. Don't take the whole thing all at once. Really just sort of, hey, we established this, we're comfortable with it, we understand what it's doing, we understand how we've operationalized it, we know what it's costing us. Now let's take the next step, right? Instead of just trying to massively shift everything up there and hope that costs and hope that optimizations will eventually come later.
We have one more question. What cost conversations are we having with clients regarding serverless versus containers versus servers?
So from my perspective, context, I love that. That's my automatic out for every answer, I think. Context, no. A lot of it comes down to what the application requirements are, right? So not every application makes sense in a serverless context. Not every application makes sense in a containerized context, though containerized is a little harder to get away from that one. And basically it's, you have to sort of look at the application, look at how it was built, look at what modifications or changes you can do. If you're going to do greenfield, so you're building a new app, then I would absolutely encourage you to have the serverless conversation within your teams, right? Can this application be successful if it essentially lives and dies in 5-minute or less increments? Can we manage state within the application, or is it a stateless app? And then if you're looking at, if the answer to some of those questions are no, then I would immediately drop into that serverless conversation, or into the containerization conversation. Naturally, where people tend to go when they start talking about containers is they look for frameworks and they immediately go to Kubernetes. Kubernetes is awesome, but it's almost a cloud within a cloud, right? And there's a whole large set of things you need to learn about Kubernetes and have to have. There's a lot of institutional knowledge you're going to build there. It's not to say that it's not bad, but if it's going to be your first step into the containerization world, I don't know if it would be my first step, right? I think I would probably start smaller, probably with something that's either Fargate within Amazon is going to make that process a little easier for you. Again, it's going to give you the opportunity to learn. It's going to manage your costs as you build that stuff out. And you can take those things and those lessons that you've learned and build that onto the next system. So I'm not saying Kubernetes is bad. It's a great tool. It does a lot of amazing things. But I don't know if I had never touched a Docker container, if I would recommend somebody just jump right into Kube and go hog wild, right? That's going to be a big elephant to chase down. So
I'd like to add that kind of goes, and Eric alluded this earlier too, is your team needs to train on that, right? How are you going to manage it type things too? So coming in slowly, as Eric is mentioned here, start small. Don't just jump out there. There's so many services on both GCP, Azure, and AWS. Certainly, don't just try to grab the whole slew and go. Start slow, build up.
And then I guess to sort of close out that conversation, right? So that's where finding a little bit sales pitchy, and I apologize for those that aren't want necessarily hear this, but that's where finding a partner that's here to help, right? We can help accelerate that deployment, right? So it doesn't feel like it's taking forever, while at the same time making sure that your team is comfortable and is learning as that process goes. So we can sort of be the guide to help get there a little bit quicker, help them understand the process and how we got there, without having to sort of spend weeks and weeks, potentially months, learning some of those types of things. So we can sort of shortcut that with some patterns and some things that we've done in the past to be successful. And it's a little different than just going to Stack Overflow or Google and saying, how do I deploy blah, 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 right? You're going to get a little bit more of that knowledge, a little more of the institutional knowledge is going to grow from some experience, from some patterns that have been successful.
Thanks everyone again for coming today. We really appreciate your time and we look forward to seeing you all in the future. If you're interested in learning more about how Trility can help your team simplify, automate, and secure how it delivers innovative experiences, then visit us at trility.io.